Good morning. I'm Raven Gray, and today's topic is disaster preparedness. Are you prepared for short or long-term disaster? To share your thoughts on the air, please call us on 415-663-8492. Now, just to clarify, by short-term disaster, I'm talking about events like earthquakes, hurricanes, tsunamis, floods, storm damage to the roads and power lines down, landslides, forest fires, and things like that. And by long-term disaster, I am talking about climate change, rising sea levels, ongoing drought, economic collapse, perhaps a collapse in the food supply, grid failure, and the possibility of rampant pandemics. Are you worried about any of these things? Do you think we need to prepare for them? And if you do, I'd love to know what you are personally doing to prepare. I'd love to hear your views on this topic. Please call in. So, Bernie, Paul, how are you preparing?
I'd say poorly, but part of my problem is I can think of all of these ways that we could be hit by a disaster. We've got all the ecological things of flooding, drought, fire, earthquake, and then we've got the economic things where we could have a financial collapse. We could have the peak oil thing, low energy, and mostly what I'm doing is thinking about it. I'm trying to plan, and I'm trying to think about kind of what's coming so that we're not so surprised when it does happen.
Well, looks like we have a call coming in.
Okay, caller, you're on the air. Welcome to KWMR. What's your name?
Ann Sands.
Ann
West Marin
Sands.
Disaster Council.
Ah, the perfect person.
Hi, Ann.
Hi, Ann. Thanks for calling in.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure. So, disaster preparedness. The big question everybody asks their local fire chief is, gee, how is our community prepared? Are we ready? And the fire chiefs look at them straight in the eye and say, we are as ready as you are. Because that is the key. Individuals and families need to be ready, and then the community will be ready. Because the fire departments obviously cannot respond to everybody when there's a huge emergency happening.
Right.
You have to be independent and take care of yourself for quite a while before you can even begin to think about 911 response.
So Anne, for those of the listeners who don't know, is the coordinator, is it, of the West Marin Disaster Council? Is that correct?
Yes. And perhaps I should explain a little bit about what that means.
Please.
The West Marin Disaster Council is an umbrella group that includes members of all the community disaster councils, like Point Reyes, Bolinas, Stinson, and so forth, and all the agencies out here, all the local volunteer fire departments, county fire, the Point Reyes National Seashore, GGNRA, the state parks, on, and the Coast Guard, and any agency that has emergency response responsibilities. And we meet quarterly and share ideas and talk about what works, what doesn't work in terms of training people and helping them get ready.
This is Bernie, and I want to compliment your entire organization because I'm believing that we're probably as well organized around this as any community. The fact that you're coordinating at such a high level for a broad area, but then it goes down to the disaster councils in each town, it goes to the neighborhood liaisons, It goes to your connection with KWMR, where we can broadcast even when the power is down, to really inform people on their hand crank radios what's going on and how we can help each other. So it's a fantastic organization that I think we can all be really proud of. And to our listeners who aren't connected with it, and how do you suggest that they get connected locally?
Oh, to find out more about disaster councils. Actually, KWMR on their website has a list of all the community disaster council coordinators. And I have that list, of course, and anyone who wants to know who their local disaster coordinator is for their community should go to their local fire station and ask. Because every fire district and every county fire area has a community disaster council.
And everybody should know who their neighborhood liaison is, and if they don't know who that is, maybe they should become it.
That's a good plan. So the first step is to contact your local fire department, whichever fire department is closest to where you live, and ask who their disaster coordinator is for that community. Then that person will give you the contact information for your neighborhood liaison. So it's a very structured, well-organized program that goes all the way down to the individual home. And Stinson, for example, just did a beautiful job of locating every house in Stinson using aerial photographs from the county. And then they sent out their volunteers, the local disaster council people, to every home, located every single propane shutoff, every water shutoff, every fire hydrant. And all of that is now mapped. And so when there's an emergency, Stinson can know exactly who needs to have what done at each particular home in their area. It's quite an amazing thing.
It is. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and Bolinas has done something similar. Inverness, I mean, all the communities have neighborhood groups that learn about each other, who has what in terms of supplies, generators, things that might be useful in a big emergency. And it's fun. It's really a great opportunity. I happen to be the neighborhood coordinator for Dogtown.
Oh, cool.
So, and I have my liaison, and my home, my ranch, is the place where everybody comes to meet and get information. So every neighborhood in West Marin has this sort of structure.
I noticed where the San Geronimo Valley just called a meeting of its disaster representatives and interested parties through their email group that they have for the valley. And part of that, I think, is motivated by what we saw up in Lake County. The Valley Fire really touched a lot of people and reminded us of that kind of a wildfire that we can have here as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and San Geronimo Valley is one of the more active areas. It's got a tremendous group. It's called VERGE, the Valley Emergency Response Group, and they have their own radios and have really done a lot of drills locally and cooperation with County Fire, and it's been an amazing job. I love this job because I've just learned so much from so many different people that then we can sort of share this in these quarterly meetings we have, and we're really, really working to get the Park Service more ready to handle the public, because this is something that's of great concern out here that, as you know, it's a very popular place. It's becoming more and more popular. And when an emergency happens on a sunny day, and there are thousands of people out here, the park needs to have a plan to figure out what they're going to do, too.
Yeah, having seen the traffic on Sir Francis Drake on Labor Day weekend, wow. Yeah,
wow, exactly. Yes. And what I love, one more little point that I want to make is how important KWMR is in this group. They are a member of this West Marin Disaster Council as well. Richard Dillman and Amanda Eichstead both attend these meetings, and it's just such a great opportunity to have this radio station out here. I want to thank you for that.
And let me ask you, I got CERT trained a little while back, and you encourage people to do that. Do you know how many people we have out here in West Marin who've had that training, and do you want to encourage people to get it if they haven't?
Yes. Thank you for doing that. The CERT training is the Community Emergency Response Training, and you become a team member when you take this training, and you are certified in emergency first aid, emergency search and rescue, and how to use radios, how to set up a medical area to handle people. And all of this is done with volunteers that are coordinated through their local fire department. And our next class is coming up. It's October 3rd and October 10th. It's a 2-day class, and you must take both days. And register. You can register online at readymarin.org. And readymarin.org website has enormous numbers of lists and recommendations for how to get ready. It's It's a wonderful site. You should go check it out. Everybody should look at readymarin.org and see what you can do to get prepared. Very, very straightforward, easy to read, easy to understand. And you can also sign up for the CERT classes on that website as well.
Thanks, Anne. That's really helpful.
Sure.
And I actually went to the Ready Marin website before I came on the show this morning, and there's these wonderful one-page get ready kits, build a kit, grab and go checklist. If you've only got 10 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour to get out of your house, what do you need to collect together? Your evacuation backpack, which I think some preppers, disaster preppers, call this a bug-out bag, a bob. Just
I've got one.
But yeah, I've got one too. Leave it by the door and grab it when you've only got a few minutes to get out. I had a question about the West Marin Disaster Council. I mean, how is that related to the Ready Marin organization?
Well, it's I guess you would say it's related. I mean, the readymarin.org website is a website, and it's a place where all the emergency response information is organized. And that is actually handled by a woman named Paula Doubleday, who lives over in San Reffell. And she works with Maggie Lang, who is the CERT coordinator for the entire county.
Okay.
And they have put this website together. So it's a place where people can post interesting information. For example, we've had Nicasio recently did a wonderful drill and wrote up a little story about that, and it is on the website. So it's an opportunity to advertise, so to speak, what your community is doing and have photographs up there, and it becomes inspirational for other communities to then do similar things for their own areas.
Would you say that the West Marin Disaster Council is really prepared for short-term disasters? I mean, what kind of disasters are we equipped for out here?
Well, our role is really more the natural disaster response, but also includes things like terrorist attacks, although we are fairly isolated out here and it isn't really a huge issue. It does affect, for example, the Golden Gate Bridge or any of the larger structures around here. So we do get a little training in that with a CERT class, but not a great deal of training. So most of our training is for fire, wildfire response, flooding, tsunamis, earthquake.
Well, I went to
storms, that sort of thing.
I went to I can't remember who was holding it. Marin County Council. These climate change meetings that they had around Point Reyes and Stinson.
Mm-hmm.
I went to one of those here in the yacht club, and the woman next to me. We were split up into neighborhoods, and we were talking about preparedness for rising seas and what the risks were, etc. And the woman next to me said that I don't know if this is true, but she said the West Marin Disaster Council had enough food for the communities for 10 days' supply. Is that true?
Well, the West Marin, let me just clarify again. The West Marin Disaster Council is the overview, the umbrella group.
Okay.
The individual neighborhood disasters councils are separate, okay? And it does get confusing.
Yes.
So, for example, there's a disaster council in Stinson. There's one in Bolinas. There's one in Muir Beach. There's one for the Point Reyes area, which includes Olema, Inverness Park, all the way up to Marshall.
Okay.
Then there's another one for Inverness and another for Tomales. And so you see it's each community, and Nicasio, San Geronimo Valley, they're separate community disaster councils.
Are they preparing differently?
Of the bigger one. Now, some of them do have food prepared, but or food storage and emergency supplies. And again, it depends on the local community and their ability to pull this together.
Okay.
Some communities have large storage units.
Okay.
That have cots and medical supplies and water and that sort of thing in it. But each community is pretty much responsible to organize their own their own materials.
Okay, thanks, Anne.
Sure.
I'm just aware, this is Bernie, of like in Marshall, the needs sometimes are different from one community to another. And there they feel that, with the flooding that can cut them into little islands, they have to be prepared at that very local level. And I know they invested in defibrillators, like one at Tony's and one at another place further north, so that even there they can't act as one community necessarily. They have to think about sort of that neighborhood and what is most needed for them.
Local survival, yeah. I think we have a trailer of supplies up there. And,
you do.
Yeah.
You do.
Oh, really?
I think you've got a couple. But, Marshall is a really, really good example. And Dillon Beach, all that area, Debert, the Dillon Beach Emergency Response Team, has raised money to buy their own supplies and their own radios. And again, it's a wonderful, wonderful organization. Debert is another one of our very active response teams. That it's a community volunteer oriented, very centralized, because these communities are so isolated from each other, and it's one of the reasons that we all love to live out here, because it's isolated and beautiful. But with that joy of living out here comes the responsibility of recognizing the fact that when a big event happens, we're going to be isolated not only from each other, but from East Marin as well. And you can bet that most of the attention is going to go to East Marin because there's more people there.
Sure.
So we're going to need to be ready to be on our own for quite a while, a couple of weeks perhaps.
At least, yes. Well, thank you so much for calling in, Adam, for all the great work that you do. And thank you.
Okay, Raymond. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Well, for myself, I've got a few cans of sardines in the cupboard.
It's a good start.
I know. I honestly don't have many supplies that would last beyond a week. I don't have any water stored particularly, but I do know where to find water in the Inverness Hills, and I think I probably know how to filter the pathogens.
That's probably more important than actually having the water stored, because you can go and refill as you need if you know that you have a source of running water.
Unless you're sick and you can't make it up there and everybody else is up there. I mean, it depends on the size of the disaster, doesn't it?
It's when it pays to know your neighbors and get on with them, right?
That's definitely, yes, number one. But then I have, I've got a radio and some, I've got a VW Westie with a pop top, which I know Paul has too. And
I didn't know you had one.
Yeah, it's the ultimate survival tool.
Yeah, that's my bug out bag right there.
Yes, me too. It's got my the water tank's full, and it's got propane, and it's got my first aid kit and everything I need, and a full tank of gas.
Well, what if the gas stations are no longer open, though? How far can you get?
Well, I can survive in my bug-out van for a couple of weeks, probably. But you're right, I couldn't drive it very far.
I'm in a house that's on stilts over the water, and so if we have a big one, no doubt my house will drop in the water. So, I'll be able to head for the high ground and just sleep in the van for a while if I survive, But and anything else too. If there's any kind of emergency there, that's the getaway vehicle. You head for the high ground and hide out for a while.
Yes.
That's my plan.
It's a good one, I think. But anyway, I mean, I honestly haven't done much to prepare for short-term emergencies. And doing this research on Ready Marin, I realized that I really don't have all of these things in place. But what I have invested in are long-term wilderness and homesteading skills and survival skills, learning how to live off the land. I know where to find wild foods. I know how to preserve them. I don't know how to hunt yet, but if you catch something, I could kill it and butcher it, and we could eat it, and I could tan the hide, and I could make your pair of slippers, Bernie.
Oh, cool.
And I've taken quite a few years of survival skill courses with my 7-year-old son, and his skills are quite strong too. So I'm confident that, we're learning, and I feel somewhat prepared. But in a real emergency out here with the electricity off and the water cut off, we probably wouldn't last a month, to be honest. And the reason I've done all this prep is because all my life I've been worried that we're heading for a big crash and that civilization is going to collapse. So I've personally been panicking about that and doing all I can to prepare. But some years ago, I realized, wow, even if I do everything, what if my neighbors aren't doing anything?
Sure.
Then, we're not going to last again beyond a month or so. So I've been investing for at least since 2007, when I co-founded the transition Transition US and Transition Towns movement, that I was one of the pioneering people anyway. And the reason I invested in that is because I saw that as a sort of community preparedness program. Although since living in Inverness, I haven't really been doing much. I've just been hiding away. But, because I've been wondering lately just how prepared our West Marin communities are. Yes, for short-term disasters, I think that's great. But, what about long-term? Who knows how to grow food here? Who knows how to store water, deal with our waste, or live off the land without fossil fuels? Or, who knows who has skills in dentistry if anything goes wrong with our teeth? Or emergency medicine or midwifery? Do we have a bigger community emergency plan in place? Now, I know Anne Sand's husband, Russ, I don't know how to pronounce his last name.
Forbrock.
He recently passed, sadly, earlier this year. He actually was part of the Transition West Marin group that was going out here, and he produced a community resilience plan known as an Energy Descent Action Plan. And I saw it some time ago. I haven't seen it lately, but he looked at all of the systems, right? Transport, water, food in West Marin, and asked that question, can we be self-reliant out here if we were cut off from the grid? And another really interesting thing that Russ did is he came up with the list of who would be the leadership here if we had a civilization breakdown or a big-time emergency. And his idea was that we would have elder women, all the elder women. He actually produced a list of the elder women in this community that he wanted to see in leadership roles. I have lost that list. I'd like to see it again. But he modeled that on the Iroquois had a system of governance whereby the elder women chose the chiefs. The chiefs did the decision-making, but it was the elder women that chose the chiefs and could fire them from those positions. And
a little bit of balance between all that testosterone that always wants to go to war and the
I think
reflection.
It's a great.
Yeah, it's a
Russ
great
was
way
a
to
true visionary ahead of his time. I'm all for it.
He was very committed to wanting us to think ahead, and I think that the starting place of what Anne talks about and is responsible for and helps coordinate throughout West Marin, that short-term view can easily help with the long term because it's building connections between neighbors. You may not have them as friends, but if you know, as she said, who has a four-wheel drive truck, who knows how to repair things. If you start sort of inventorying the skills, I think you'd find West Marin is rich in skills.
Absolutely.
We have people who are growing food. We have people who are making clothes. We have people in all of these disciplines, and it's just we're organized around today's world, which is so outsourcing everything. But I think it would reorganize itself to a local economy rather quickly.
Yeah, I think so too. And that's always been a priority for me, is maintaining contact with neighbors, even if you don't see eye to eye, but at least and I wrote a thing about it in Cultural Potholes. Gossip, gossip is just information about your neighbors, basically. And it has a bad connotation, but really it's about knowing what's going on in everyone's houses around you so that when the time comes, you know if they're sick or if they're not there or if they're,
You're talking more than the sheriff's calls that we read every week, right?
Oh, yeah. And no, I think that's really important to maintain contact, even just to know what's going on in your community, because we're all kind of scattered, especially up in Marshall.
The skills training, I think that you're talking about, Raven, I think is so important. I mean, there's a lot of skills that I think are at risk of losing. And, there still are people who are sources for them. And before we've completely turned everything over to the marketplace and privatization and outsourcing, we need to get back to valuing within our community those people that have those skills that can share them with others so that we could quickly build up our skill level. I mean, I think our skill level is on the verge of going extinct if we don't do it.
What kind of skills do you have, Bernie, that you bring to the table?
I think mostly in terms of planning, thinking. I know people want to do action things, but I think that contemplating what could happen, I mean, we don't know how unraveling will take shape. It's going to be in fits and starts and peaks and valleys, and we all know that the way we're living now will change. We just don't know how it'll change, how fast it'll change, what will be the triggers, etc. So raising awareness about that, and that we should be now sort of preparing ourselves mentally and emotionally for some kind of collapse. That way, if we grieve now for the fact that we're about to lose it, and then when it happens, I think we're in a much better place to move on, to get to that acceptance where we can do something about it and sort of jump into action. And I think most people aren't ready to jump into action until there's more evidence of a real problem like that. But I think we can think it through. We can build the framework for, as you were talking, Russ did with the energy descent plan, how might we organize ourselves if we are faced with a collapse of the grid, the grid going down, and peak oil, no more cheap fuel. The Greenbridge gas station is not open, and nobody's going over the hill anymore. And so that kind of reorganization we should be thinking and planning about. And I think lots of people are, but that's my area where I feel like I can contribute. So trying to raise awareness like we do with this show, like this particular topic and program, is something that's important to me.
So you're talking about collapse of civilization and a big disaster, a long-term thing, but you're not prepared at all for short-term disaster, Bernie, or are you?
Well, we have water bottles. My wife does some canning of fruits and stuff, and we have cans. We have the sardines and the tuna fish and that kind of stock. But I think that's less important. I think having an idea of where, when the water doesn't come through the tap anymore, do you go to get your water for the future? When the electricity is out, what do you now do for heating? We have a wood supply, a wood stack of firewood that we could heat and we could cook on for a while. So we have some of those rudimentary aspects. I wish I was more physically fit. I think we live on a hill where it's tough to get around, and so I'm feeling very vulnerable in that way. And I think a lot of us are very vulnerable who live in the hills and really depend on our cars to get anywhere. But I'm always heartened by these young folks that I see on the weekends coming over the hills on their bicycles and knowing that there's a generation of people who can live without cars and still have mobility. Yes, I've been talking about long term, but short term, yeah. I mean, yes, we have batteries. We have a certain amount, but I'm more concerned about the long term than the short term.
I think getting physically fit, though, is a good survival skill.
I
think that's important. Yeah. What about you? So, one critical piece of kit, which I talked about earlier, was the bug out bag or the get out of Dodge bag. And, some of the items you might need in there are, plenty of food, nutritional bars, peanut butter, dense energy foods, probably not too many power bars, but powdered milk perhaps, or food for special diets, and then perhaps some tools like a shovel, a wrench, a broom, an axe, and then of course some scissors and some toothbrush and some soap, and whatever your pet might. I was actually quite surprised to find online a number of resources for pet preparedness, which
pets are very tasty in an emergency.
Very funny, Paul. But, the list gets kind of endless. When I was looking, I'm like, goodness me, I can't possibly get all this together. And, one big consideration is the toilet, guys. I mean, what are you going to do if the water isn't on and you haven't got any electricity? You're going to dig a hole?
Well, you create a little outhouse. Yes, we're going to have to go outside again.
How far down are you going to dig?
I don't know. How much strength do I have?
Well, he's not very fit, Bernie, so not very far is the answer. Or you could use a bucket with a big garbage bag and add a bit of litter or sawdust and then do that up. But in a short term, that might do. But in the long term, human waste is a big consideration because of all the pathogens. And here on the bay, Tamales Bay, would just, I think, anyway, enough said. Bernie.
Very good. And we have a caller on line one. Hi, caller. You're on the air. Let's have your name.
Hi, this is Martine in Bolinas.
Martine.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome.
Thank you. I would like to speak briefly about buckets and poop.
Buckets and poop.
And
great.
The Human Manure book is a really great resource, and that was Peter Warshall years ago. He did a survey of all the compost toilet systems, and he concluded, after extensive research, that the best system was the bucket with sawdust or other dry material, and you just layer it. And I saw a couple days ago up at the Fairfax hardware store. They have the snap-on lids. They snap on to a 5-gallon bucket. And it's very nice to have a little seat and a lid that closes tightly. And you can also order the whole bucket and lid from Emergency Essentials. And, of course, then you need a sequestered place. You layer it, and I can tell you from experience it takes several days before you have any need to empty it, and it does not smell.
Wow.
You don't put any pee in it. And then when it gets, gets up 2/3 full or so, you put it into a compost pile and keep it covered from the rain, and it will keep digesting itself. It won't smell, and it's a great backup system to have.
Absolutely.
So we'll have our 5-gallon buckets with snap-on lids and a big bag of sawdust, which is free, or other dry material that you gather.
And then what? You just pee anywhere else outside?
Well, you have a little bucket and pee in the bucket and mix that with water and put it on your plants.
On your plants.
Yes.
It's a resource.
It's a resource.
I have that book, the Humanure Handbook. I met those guys that wrote that. It was great.
So thank you so much, and I'll say bye.
Oh, thank you so much for that
Martine.
tip. Brilliant.
We were talking about pets before. I know in the Valley Fire, the larger animals, the horses, were a big problem, and people were having to let them loose so that they could fend for themselves because they didn't have time to really evacuate them.
Well, apparently in Hurricane Katrina, that was a really bad idea when everybody let their dogs loose and they formed small packs and then attacked people. So
I think here in West Marin, I'm not a member of that equestrian group, but they have organized themselves to help each other when that is if there's a fire, to help that way. And I was thinking, I know Anne is a rider. I hope she's still listening. Very accomplished, and the times we run out of gasoline, we might be happy to have people riding horse between our communities.
I would love that.
Helping us at least get the word and some critical supplies from one town to another. So we can look to creative ways to have people that have those hobbies even put to work for us.
Good idea.
It's good to have a good boat handy too if you're on the bay. So
do you have a boat handy, Paul?
I do.
Oh, and how far do you think you'd get in that? Just up and down.
I'm not going very far.
But there's a lot of kayaks. We have the kayak rental companies that...
Yeah, but do you have your bug-out bag in the boat?
Bug-out bag's too big for the boat. But
and do you guys know how to fish?
Yes.
No.
I do.
Well, I think we have another caller on line 1.
On line 2, here we go. Hello, caller, you're on the air. What's your name?
Hi there, this is Paula Pratt calling from West Sebastopol.
Paula.
Hi, Paula.
How are you guys today?
Yay, nice to hear from you.
A long-time Bolinas resident.
Yeah, thank you so much for having this show. Preparing for what's on the pike is something I think about every day. And I was really excited about your show. I've been listening since the beginning.
Thank you.
And, I really wanted to hear from as many callers as possible about what they're doing. I'm very curious as to knowing what everybody's doing to get people that are aware of what's coming down the pike. But what are they doing about it? I've done some things financially to, pull my money out of bank and to save it in other ways so that it's more liquid. When I was in Bolinas, I just moved about 6 months ago. I had food stuff, lots of them, big boxes, underneath my bed for several years, probably like 4 or 5 years. So I feel like I've been thinking about this and doing my best to wrap my mind around it and prepare myself as an individual. But I'm curious to know, and I appreciate the conversation as to what are your neighbors doing, because even if I prepare and I have, 40 pounds of rice and I have a bunch of foodstuffs and I've got a water supply, what if my neighbors don't have anything? Then where does that leave me? It doesn't leave me that much more secure.
Right.
So I'm just really appreciating the conversation. I don't really know that I have anything other than, and I was very interested to hear that Raven, as a leader in this whole movement towards what's coming down the pike, that you just got some sardines in your cabinet. that you would have X, Y, and Z and have all these things put together, and that I would be able to follow a recipe, and have I don't know. I was just really quite surprised
that I'm not prepared.
I don't know that but actually looking at the neighbor situation, how can we be ultimately prepared?
Right.
Well, Paula, this is Bernie. I know that there are some people who think in terms of what stock should I be in, or could I buy silver and gold, and will that get me through? And a lot of those are, difficult situations that I don't think in the long term help as much as some of the stuff we've even been talking about, the forming relationships, coming together as community. Now, your neighbors might not have saved the foodstuffs that you have. My bet is they have some skills that they can trade for some of your foodstuff. At least that's what I'm believing, is that if we come together, we do better than if we individually hoard. I don't think that hoarding is the answer, just like I don't think that there are any stocks that will ultimately save us from a global economic collapse. Yep. But the preparedness mentally, and then accepting that and moving forward, humans are very resourceful. I know that you have skills in terms of helping people in terms of what's wrong with their bodies or their health and stuff. That's every bit as important, I think, as having the foodstuffs saved. I
mean, for me, I believe that I'm living in the wrong place right now. And I'm in the Inverness. Is it Second Valley, Bernie? Where do I live? I live up by the school in Inverness. I'm new, so I've only been here 2 years. Yeah. But, most of my neighbours aren't even there. They're weekenders, or they're holiday homes, or they're empty. And, I could probably survive a bit raiding their homes, raiding their larders and their fridges and things.
It's all good shelter, and it's they've got supplies in there.
Definitely enough firewood, and I know where the water is. But ultimately, I would like to be living in a more vibrant, resilient community where everybody is actually preparing. And so, I have lived... Cedarville. I have lived in intentional communities, and Findhorn and the Eco Village in New Mexico, and I've lived like that before I had a kid, and now I'm already wondering, why am I living in Inverness, in the middle of nowhere, where we don't really know our neighbors actually.
Paula, in Sebastopol, do you feel people there are organizing as community around this issue?
Yeah, I resonate with what Raven just said, because that's exactly where I'm at, is that I don't feel like I'm positioned living in the right situation. I moved from Bolinas to West Sebastopol. I love it here. My intention when I moved here I was planning to move up onto a 10-acre farm to live with other people, buy a tiny home, and to have a very low rent, and to be living within a community on a nice piece of property where we're growing food, we're raising animals, and we're working all together. That turned out to not be a good situation whatsoever. So I ended up having to leave that. Now I'm in a $1,500 a month one-bedroom house at the end of a private lane. Mm-hmm. I don't have the community around me, and I don't have a low rent and sustainable spot that, I love the idea of a tiny house or a trailer or something like that can be mobile and that is inexpensive and very, very efficient on a piece of land with community around. That seems to me the ultimate situation, and one that I'm definitely keeping my eye out for and wanting to cultivate. It seems more sustainable, and it seems that it would be the best bet possible to have, like you're saying, Bernie, relationships are in place and intact.
It's very important. Well, we hope it all works out for you there. Thank you for calling in, Paula.
Paula.
We have another
Thanks,
caller
Paula.
coming in. Thank you.
Okay, well, if you guys have any leads on land up here, let me know.
Okay.
Okay, I know a good realtor.
Bye. We have another caller, I believe.
We do. Caller, you're on the air.
Hi, this is Robin.
Hey, Robin.
Hey, Robin.
Hey, guys.
Hey, we're going to have a better connection today.
Yes. Oh, except my throat is a little...
Except you just caught a frog.
I always have a frog in my throat, which I'm going to eat when we have a disaster.
There you go.
But I just, for what Raven was saying a little earlier, both my husband and I, we have been exploring and thinking about where would be a more resilient, viable place to live. And with so much shifting and changing in our area, that is not necessarily change that makes for resilient, diverse, present community. But that's kind of the bigger picture. Some of the smaller pieces of what we do is, my son calls me Apocalypto Mom, because I
love that.
Thinking of everything. So one thing we have is we have a place that if there's just a hideous, horrible earthquake or disaster where we can't be in contact, that all of my family, including my son, know where Andy and I are planning to head with our tent and our stuff, so that the area that we will be in if something happens. And the other thing that we do is have a safety deposit box with important documents in another city, another area. So for me, it's back home on the Gulf Coast with my dad. And same here, so that if they get hit by another big hurricane, I have some documents and things of his here. If we get hit by a big earthquake, he has things of mine there. And also, when our power grid is so vulnerable, and as we all know, when the power grid goes out, electronic forms of money payment are very difficult, and stores can't really process much. So we keep a small cash stash of ones, 5, 10s, 20s, as well as having a checkbook with checks, so that you can be able to purchase things or buy things if the grid goes out as it did. I think it was for 2 or 3 days.
Yep.
Maybe it was 12 years ago. But those are just some of the little things. But for us, we're thinking more the bigger picture. And I know when we lived in Marshall, and very much spearheaded by Donna and Paul and other Marshallites, is that there was a sort of a community. We had the disaster trailer with things. And so I felt like in Marshall that there really was a sense of what we would all need, and that we would all be taking care of each other in that area.
Yeah, we get pretty regularly cut off if there's just a bad storm. We're kind of on our own we've been that way. When all 3 exits were cut off one year, it was a useful thing, actually, and it was kind of nice. It was very quiet, and everyone looked out for each other. It was great.
That awareness of your vulnerability, I think, really makes the difference. And once it's been exposed by some natural disaster, it actually makes the community stronger. And I really like what you're saying, Robin, about having a place to meet and having some redundancy for important documents and stuff, very important items.
Yeah, because I think one of the most scary things, I know growing up where we had really bad hurricanes, is when you can't be in contact or know how to get in contact with loved ones. So at least if you know this is where we're going to be headed. So if it's really a huge disaster, head that way. So those kinds of things. But I think the other thing that Donna frequently brought up that we talked about was in West Marin, we need to think about if a disaster happens, say if something had happened over Labor Day weekend when we had a gajillion million visitors, that how are we also going to have something in place so that we have to work with those people too? And, you can't, in a big disaster, I know having lived through some pretty horrific hurricanes, you can't just hole up in your own little space. It becomes a community issue to help each other out.
Sure.
And, so anyway, those are some of my thoughts. But the bigger thing, too, as Raven was saying, is, looking towards, am I living somewhere and investing in community where we're still going to be here 10 years from now together? What's going to happen with the waters rising? I mean, Bernie, you could probably address this better. Andy and I were talking about where would be the most perfect place to live where we're not going to be inundated by water rise, and where we're not going to have to worry about scorching temperatures. I mean, those kinds of things of where would be, if you could move anywhere, that's the safest place to move. So I'll jump off the call.
Thank you so much for calling in, and that was great to hear from you, Robin. And I just want to answer that briefly, that I've been asking that question to visionaries and ecologists, and for a decade or 2 decades or more, and the answer I've got back from James Lovelock and Teddy Goldsmith and all these people who've made it their life to study these things, is that there is nowhere on the planet that is safe or immune where because climate change, we're all interconnected. It affects everything.
Nature is everywhere.
Yeah, and as the jet streams change, they're talking about this big cold going to hit the Northeast and the Midwest this winter because of sort of unprecedented patterns of jet streams. And then if ocean currents change, it changes as well. I mean, I always thought California was a good place. If you're living in a really low-lie area, you should be thinking about, the thing is, sea level isn't going to rise all at once. When it really hits you is when there's a combination of a big storm and high tide. And the new high tide level combined with the extra precipitation coming down, that can catch you inland along a stream as well as on the ocean itself. So a lot of folks in Marin right now are getting notices that there's a remapping going on of flood areas, and homeowners who have mortgages, the mortgage lending company is requiring you to get that flood insurance. Now, the federal government offers flood insurance, but people are getting notices that they now need flood insurance where before they didn't have it. If you hadn't thought about it before, that's sort of a wake-up call when you get that notice in the mail. And, the other thing about floods, the sea level rise, is it's not just about flooding your place, but cutting you off. In Inverness, I feel like on the hillside, I'm not vulnerable to the rainstorm or the ocean rise, but I have to be prepared to be cut off because the roads, the Sir Francis Drake, the Highway 1, those are going to wipe out in places.
So as you were just talking then about floods, you reminded me that not so long ago I read on Facebook, I think, it was about this super fault line that's off the coast of California. Do you know what I'm talking about? This mega fault line. It's something I can't remember the name of.
Not San Andreas?
No, not San Andreas.
Well, there's the one up north, the Cascadian subduction zone.
That's it. Yeah. And apparently when that goes, and that is apparently going to go soon, it's the big one. This is the big one that you've never even heard of, that everything west of I-5 is toast. So forget about flood prep.
Well, we're on an island then, you mean?
Well, I think if you're on the top of Inverness Hill, you might be on an island, but I mean, I don't know where you live, Bernie, but I suspect you're
high enough that I don't feel like we're going to fall into the water, but I do expect we might be on an island.
I have to say, since I read that, though, now whenever I'm at Drake's Beach or Kehoe, and I go there a lot, I'm always looking at how fast can I get to the high ground, and, is that
the
going to be high enough?
The tsunamis is something we get warned about. At the beaches, there are tsunami warnings, and that's realistic as another thing that can hit you kind of quickly.
I remember there being, my sister lived on the coast in Hawaii on the Big Island, and they have these big sirens with the tsunami warnings on, and you get a 2-minute warning if one's going to hit. And we had a 2-minute warning while we were there. We didn't realize it was a practice. We thought it was real.
Yeah, they do it every week.
I faffed around for 2 minutes, guys, looking for my car keys. I just went into a complete panic, and so did my sister, and we would have been, wiped out. But anyway.
Could have been in the news.
Can I answer one of your earlier questions to me about what am I doing since I'm not fit? And but I do take nature walks with my wife, and so just being in nature, doing my sit spots, getting more familiar with that environment, so I'm not only comfortable in the house, I can be comfortable outside. And I took a class recently. Edward Willey teaches basket weaving, and I've harvested some tule here. There's tule down the creek along some of the inlets to our bay, and I'm going to be making baskets. Now, they're very rudimentary. They look like a kindergartner made them, but it's a start. It's
great,
something
Bernie.
to get me more in touch with actually working with my hands, which I don't do much of. Most of the time, I'm on the computer, I'm in the car, and I'm recognizing when that all goes away, I got to have something else to do. And so I'm going to be basket weaving.
I love that you're doing that. That's excellent. Let's see, couple more minutes left. One thing I did want to mention was about transition. For those of you who maybe haven't heard of it before, it brings together people in the community to create resilience, to withstand any kind of shock, whether it's from climate change or economic collapse, biodiversity decline, or fossil fuel pollution. And, it's an international movement. It's pretty big in Europe and in other countries. It's not massive in the U.S., although we do have Transition U.S., www.preparedness.org, where you can read up about it. But at one point, we even had this Transition West Marin, which Bernie, my co-host here, was part of. It started off in 2007, and local author Jerry Mander was involved, and Richard Heinberg came to town, and we had these lively, well-attended community conversations, I believe, in the Dance Palace, although I wasn't actually here then. And at the first event, people came together and brainstormed, looking at West Marin 25 years ahead. What do we want our community to look like? Looking at food, energy, healthcare, government, housing and shelter, water, all those kinds of things. And then at the second event, apparently our community refined that vision to look at more specifically targets for the next 3 to 5 years. And it seems like when I looked at there was lots of visioning maps and great ideas that came out of that. And I'm just wondering, where did all that enthusiasm go? What happened to all that collective wisdom? And I'm going to ask Bernie that since he's sitting here.
Well, it was a long process. Bing Gong was a leader in bringing folks to his home and organizing, and it grew with a lot of communities having a lot of interest. And we discovered really that there are a lot of resources out here. They may not be organized in the Transition West Marin model, but they do communicate with each other, do work with each other. And I think the reason it may not have grown is because most people are busy in their day-to-day lives, earning a living, doing their job, raising their kids, feeding their family, and this isn't a priority. These disasters become a priority when nature or the economy gives us a sudden shock. And some of us have the time to anticipate those events because I'm semi-retired, but I have a lot of time, or I take a lot of time because it's a high priority for me. But I find that for most people, it doesn't rise to that same level of priority. And therefore, some of us need to keep raising the awareness. We do this show here to keep the conversation alive around this issue and lots of issues that are going to help us in the long term.
Well, we're definitely living in a time of great change, and I personally believe that we're headed into a long-term survival situation, a big crash. So I'd like us all to start preparing now, and that's why we had this conversation today, and that's why I was invested in the transition movement. And I really hope this conversation wakes people up in our community to the idea that we have a better chance of survival or even thrival if we all work together on preparing for an uncertain future. I wish to thank all of our listeners and callers today for your participation, and I hope you'll tune in every Thursday at 11 a.m. because your voice really does matter.
Has been Let's Talk with co-hosts Raven Gray, Paul Reffell, and me, Bernie Stephan.